Being black abroad can flip the script fast. One moment, a place is marketed as progressive, affordable, and full of opportunity. The next, you're navigating suspicious stares, closed doors, selective enforcement of rules, and a quiet realization that equality isn't evenly distributed once you cross borders. This video exists because too many conversations about global living skip the part that actually matters: how race shapes daily life when you're not the default. In today's investigation on virtual travel by Brian, I'm breaking down the top 10 countries where being black is a serious challenge. This isn't travel fear-mongering, and it's definitely not influencer hype. It's a reality check. We're talking systemic racism, racial inequality, and the kinds of discrimination that show up in housing applications, job interviews, policing encounters, social spaces, and even basic dignity. The stuff that doesn't always make headlines but slowly wears people down. For anyone researching black expat life, being black overseas, or relocating abroad while black, this video is essential. Some destinations praised as safe, diverse, or expat-friendly can feel very different once anti-black racism and discrimination against Africans enter the picture. These patterns affect safety, opportunity, mental health, and long-term stability, and they're not evenly talked about. Stick with me through the countdown, because the later entries reveal realities many black travelers and black Americans overseas say they wish they'd known sooner. Watch to the end, share your experiences in the comments, and subscribe for honest, data-driven global insight you won't get from travel brochures. Number 10. United Arab Emirates. The skyline sells a fantasy first. Glass towers, luxury malls, spotless airports, and a promise that success here is only limited by ambition. But for many black Africans entering the United Arab Emirates, especially without elite passports or corporate contracts, reality starts revealing itself quickly, and it's far less Instagram-friendly. This is a place where status isn't just about money, it's about where you're from, how you're categorized, and what kind of labor you're expected to provide. Human rights reporting has repeatedly shown that the Gulf's economic model depends heavily on migrant labor, and that dependency comes with sharp vulnerabilities. Organizations like Human Rights Watch and World Bank-linked research platforms have documented wage theft, recruitment debt, passport confiscation, limited legal recourse, and brutal working conditions, particularly for low-wage workers. Black Africans are disproportionately represented in these pipelines, especially in construction, security, sanitation, and domestic work. When your legal status is tied to an employer through sponsorship systems, just quit isn't an option. It can mean detention, deportation, or worse. Heat isn't just uncomfortable here, it's lethal. Reports have tied extreme temperatures to worker injuries and deaths, while accountability remains murky. And while reforms are often announced, enforcement gaps persist, leaving the most vulnerable workers exposed. This isn't accidental, it's structural. When labor is viewed as disposable, protections tend to be optional. Then there's the social layer. Life in public spaces can feel wildly different, depending on how you're perceived. Service culture often operates on an unspoken hierarchy. Nationality, skin tone, and job title quietly determine how smoothly doors open or don't. Black Africans frequently report sharper scrutiny in malls, clubs, and workplaces, while those with Western passports or high-status roles experience a noticeably softer landing. Same city. Completely different treatment. The irony is impossible to miss. The UAE markets itself as global, diverse, and future-focused, yet daily life can still reflect deeply entrenched racial and class stratification. If you arrive as an executive, investor, or professional with legal protections, the experience can be polished and profitable. If you arrive through low-wage recruitment channels, the shine fades fast. This entry isn't about denying opportunity, it's about exposing who that opportunity is really designed for. The UAE can be dazzling from the top floors, but underneath the luxury skyline sits a hierarchy that Black Africans feel immediately and live with daily. The question every viewer should ask is simple: are you arriving as a guest or as labor? Number 9. Russia. Cold weather has a way of stripping things down to the truth, and in Russia, that truth can hit black residents fast. Visibility is unavoidable here. Standing out isn't optional, and for many black Africans and black foreigners, that visibility comes with consequences that go far beyond awkward stares. In certain cities and regions, being black doesn't just mark you as foreign, it marks you as suspect, expendable, or simply not meant to be there. Human rights reporting has long documented xenophobic harassment and racially motivated violence affecting migrants and non-ethnically Russian residents. Black people often sit at the sharpest edge of that reality. Street-level encounters can range from aggressive policing to random stops, questioning, and selective enforcement that somehow never seems random. Where you experience this most depends heavily on location and political climate. Some cities feel merely uncomfortable, others feel openly hostile. The common thread is unpredictability, and unpredictability is exhausting. Law enforcement interactions deserve special attention. Reports from organizations like Human Rights Watch describe patterns where migrants and visibly non-Slavic residents face disproportionate scrutiny. The rules don't always change, but how strictly they're applied can. That creates a daily environment where being black means constantly calculating risk. Which neighborhoods feel safer, when to speak, when to stay silent, when to keep moving. Then there's the labor angle. And this is where the story gets darker. Investigations reported by outlets like AP News have exposed recruitment schemes targeting African workers with promises of education, factory jobs, or pathways to opportunity. Once on the ground, some found themselves trapped, underpaid, overworked, or placed in dangerous situations with little legal protection. When contracts are unclear and language barriers are high, exploitation thrives. Too good to be true, offers don't just disappoint here, they can destroy lives. What makes this especially troubling is how disposable black labor can feel within these systems. If something goes wrong, there's often no safety net, just silence, dismissal, or a quick exit from the country. The message is subtle but clear. You are replaceable. Russia likes to project strength, tradition, and order, but strength without accountability becomes intimidation, and order without inclusion turns into exclusion. For black residents, especially newcomers, that combination can create an environment where daily life feels like survival rather than living. This isn't about isolated incidents or bad actors. It's about patterns. Patterns that make black people feel watched, undervalued, and easily discarded. The real question isn't whether opportunity exists here. It's who that opportunity is designed to protect when things go wrong. Number 8. China. Economic opportunity opens the door first. Trade, manufacturing, fast money, fast cities, and a promise that hustle is respected here. For many Africans and black foreigners, entry into China often begins with business. Import-export, sourcing, teaching, logistics. And for a while, it can feel transactional but workable. Then fear, rumor, or social panic enters the room, and suddenly being an economic partner doesn't protect you from being treated like a problem. Academic research published through outlets like Cambridge University Press and Sage Journals has documented patterns of discrimination against Africans in China, long before headlines made it obvious. Stereotyping, social distancing, both literal and figurative, and unequal treatment in services weren't born overnight. They were amplified. The COVID-era incidents simply pulled back a curtain that many black residents already knew was there. The pressure point shows up most clearly in major trading hubs, particularly cities that host large African business communities. During the widely reported Guangzhou incident, Africans described being subjected to heightened scrutiny, evictions, forced testing, and public suspicion, sometimes without clear justification. Research discussions frame this not as chaos, but as how quickly blackness can be reframed as risk when anxiety spikes. One day you're a customer. The next day, you're a liability. Housing is another quiet battlefield. Studies have referenced cases where hotels and landlords refused service to Africans, citing vague policy issues, health concerns, or sudden rule changes that somehow only applied to certain faces. Commercial venues followed similar patterns, service denial that was informal, hard to appeal, and easy to dismiss. No signs posted, no arguments required, just no. What makes this especially draining is the inconsistency. Treatment can swing wildly depending on neighborhood, timing, and mood. One clerk smiles, another freezes. One business welcomes you, the next shuts the door mid-conversation. It creates a constant mental tax, reading rooms, managing tone, calculating visibility. That's not culture shock, that's survival math. Humor helps people cope here, but sarcasm doesn't fix hierarchy. Being black in China can mean existing in a space where curiosity and suspicion live side by side. You may be photographed, stared at, praised, avoided, all within the same afternoon. The contradiction is exhausting. China isn't a single experience, and not every black resident will face the same obstacles. But research makes one thing clear: when fear enters the system, black people are often the first to feel the consequences. Opportunity may open the door, but acceptance decides how long you're allowed to stay comfortable inside. The real question viewers should ask themselves is simple: what happens when the mood changes? Number 7. Japan. Safety is Japan's calling card. Clean streets, punctual trains, low violent crime. On paper, it looks like a dream. But for black residents and visitors, safety often comes bundled with something else: constant visibility. You're not blending in here, and that visibility can quietly morph into scrutiny. Japan can feel calm on the surface while asking you over and over again to prove you belong. Human rights reporting has pointed out gaps in comprehensive anti-discrimination protections affecting foreigners and minorities, including people of African descent. One of the most commonly reported friction points is policing. Stop-and-question encounters, often framed as routine checks, show up disproportionately in minority experiences. It's rarely dramatic, it's polite, it's procedural, and that's what makes it draining. When random checks don't feel random, the message is subtle but clear: you're being watched. Surveillance isn't always a uniform and a badge. Sometimes it's the extra glance from staff, the pause before service, the way a simple interaction stretches longer than it should. None of this screams danger, but over time it adds up. You start planning your routes, rehearsing explanations, keeping documents close. Not because you did anything wrong, but because being prepared feels safer than being surprised. Housing is where the smile can disappear entirely. No foreigners policies, sometimes explicit, sometimes quietly enforced, have been widely discussed in advocacy circles. And when those barriers hit, black people often feel the impact more sharply. Landlords may cite language issues, rules, or building policies, even when those concerns magically vanish for other foreigners. Nightlife can mirror this too. Selective entry, sudden capacity limits, or the classic members-only line that appears right on cue. What's ironic is that curiosity and admiration can exist alongside exclusion. Black people may be photographed, complimented, or treated like a novelty, right up until access is denied. It's a strange mix of fascination and distance. You're interesting, just not invited. Japan's social order values harmony, and confrontation is rare. That means discrimination doesn't always shout, it whispers. There's no argument to win, no rule to challenge in the moment. Doors simply don't open. Conversations quietly end. And because it's subtle, it's easy for others to dismiss. Are you sure? Which makes the experience feel even more isolating. Japan can absolutely be safe. It can be efficient. It can be beautiful. But safety isn't the same as acceptance. For black residents, the challenge isn't surviving the streets. It's surviving the accumulation of small exclusions that remind you, day after day, that comfort here often comes with conditions. The question worth asking isn't whether you'll be harmed. It's how long you can carry the weight of being constantly evaluated. Number 6. Tunisia. Sun, sea, and history sell Tunisia as approachable. Mediterranean charm, affordable living, and a crossroads between Africa and Europe. But for many black people, especially sub-Saharan Africans, the experience can turn harsh fast. This is one of those places where the challenge isn't hidden in microaggressions or quiet exclusion. It's loud, public, and sometimes violent. Human rights organizations like Amnesty International, along with reporting from Reuters, have documented a disturbing surge in anti-black violence and racist rhetoric in recent years. What changed? Politics. When economic pressure rises and leaders start pointing fingers, migrants become convenient targets. And in Tunisia, black migrants and refugees have been pushed directly into the spotlight, portrayed not as people, but as problems. For sub-Saharan Africans living, studying, or passing through, daily life can involve harassment in public spaces, denial of services, arbitrary detention, or forced removals. Amnesty has detailed cases where black migrants were evicted, assaulted, or abandoned in remote border areas. This isn't about feeling uncomfortable. This is about personal safety becoming unpredictable, sometimes overnight. Students haven't been spared either. Young Africans who arrived expecting education and opportunity have found themselves navigating fear instead, avoiding certain neighborhoods, limiting movement, and constantly reassessing who to trust. When basic activities like shopping, renting housing, or seeking medical care come with added risk, normal life stops being normal. The public climate matters here. After inflammatory political rhetoric framed Black migrants as threats, fear spread quickly. And fear doesn't stay theoretical. It shows up in how people look at you, talk to you, or decide whether to help you. When scapegoating becomes normalized, violence doesn't need instructions, it finds permission. What makes this situation especially troubling is how fast conditions deteriorated. Tunisia didn't slowly drift into this moment, it pivoted. One season, people felt tolerated. The next, they felt hunted. That volatility is the real danger. Stability matters more than slogans, and when the mood of a country turns on a dime, Black people often feel the impact first. Sarcasm feels almost inappropriate here, but it's hard not to notice the contradiction. Tunisia is part of Africa, yet Black Africans are treated as outsiders, invaders, or disposable labor. That irony isn't lost on those living it. This entry isn't about painting every citizen the same. It's about recognizing patterns backed by data and documentation. When leaders choose scapegoats, societies fracture, and Black migrants usually pay the highest price. Tunisia's challenge isn't subtle, and it isn't theoretical. It's a case study in how quickly safety, dignity, and belonging can disappear when fear is weaponized. The question viewers need to ask isn't whether opportunity exists, it's how fast that opportunity can turn into danger when politics change. We're halfway through the countdown. If you are enjoying the video so far, hit the like button, subscribe to Virtual Travel by Brian, and ring the notification bell for more informative content. Let's get back into it. Number 5. Italy. Italy sells romance effortlessly. Sunlit piazzas, ancient ruins, slow food, and a lifestyle that looks tailor-made for postcards. But for many Black residents and visitors, the dream can crack the moment daily life begins. The issue isn't the scenery, it's how Blackness is interpreted once the novelty wears off. International reporting, including coverage by Reuters, has raised persistent concerns about racial profiling and unequal treatment of people of African descent, particularly in law enforcement interactions. Stop-and-check culture is where this shows up most clearly. It's not always aggressive. Often it's casual, routine, and conveniently justified. Papers get checked, bags get searched, questions linger longer than necessary, and somehow, the same faces keep getting stopped. When patterns repeat, coincidence stops being a convincing explanation. Policing isn't the only pressure point. Housing can be an obstacle course with invisible hurdles. European monitoring bodies like the Council of Europe have pointed to discrimination in rental markets, where Black applicants face higher rejection rates or are quietly funneled into poorer conditions. Listings disappear. Calls go unanswered. Suddenly the apartment isn't available anymore. No argument, no appeal, just silence. It's exclusion with a smile. Then there's the informal job sector, which quietly absorbs a large number of African migrants. Agriculture, street vending, domestic work, industries that keep running because someone is willing to do the labor others avoid. The problem isn't the work, it's the vulnerability. Irregular contracts, long hours, underpayment, and limited legal protection create an environment where exploitation thrives. When your status is fragile, speaking up feels risky. When you're replaceable, fairness becomes optional. What makes Italy especially confusing is the contrast. Warm personal interactions can exist right alongside systemic bias. You might be welcomed in a cafe, joked with by locals, even embraced socially, then treated with suspicion 2 blocks later by authorities or landlords. The emotional whiplash is real. You're visible but not always valued, included but conditionally. Sarcasm sneaks in when you notice how often Black people are framed as newcomers in a country with centuries of migration, trade, and empire tied directly to Africa. History is celebrated loudly, accountability less so. When economic stress rises, migrants and minorities often become convenient explanations for problems they didn't create. Italy isn't uniformly hostile, and many Black people build meaningful lives here. But the friction is real, and it shows up in places that shape everyday stability: policing, housing, and work. The lifestyle can be beautiful, The food can be incredible. The culture can feel alive. The real question is whether beauty compensates for constantly being scrutinized. Italy's challenge isn't that opportunity doesn't exist, it's that access to dignity often depends on how suspicious your presence feels to someone else. And that's a tax Black people end up paying daily, whether they signed up for it or not. Number 4. Sweden. Sweden's reputation walks into the room before you do. Progressive politics, strong social systems, equality baked into the national brand. It sounds like the kind of place where racism would have been solved in an earlier software update. But for many Black residents, daily life tells a more complicated story. The issue here isn't loud hostility. It's quiet friction, wrapped in politeness and paperwork. Monitoring bodies like the Council of Europe have pointed to ongoing challenges around how racism and intolerance are understood, taught, and addressed, especially in schools. That matters more than it sounds. When racism is framed as something historical, foreign, or not really a Swedish problem, today's experiences get minimized. Black students can report exclusion or bias and be met with confusion instead of concern. If it's not overt, it often doesn't count. And when it doesn't count, it doesn't get fixed. That attitude spills into the social climate. Sweden prizes consensus and calm, which can make uncomfortable conversations feel unwelcome. Calling out bias risks being labeled disruptive. Staying quiet protects the vibe, but not the people dealing with it. So exclusion becomes subtle, normalized, and easy to dismiss. No slurs required, just distance. Work and housing are where the soft barriers start flexing. On paper, Sweden is fair. In practice, studies and monitoring reports describe patterns that many Black residents recognize instantly. Fewer callbacks, longer job searches, unexplained rejections, and an unspoken preference for names, accents, and backgrounds that feel safe. Landlords may smile, nod, and then never follow up. Employers may praise your resume right before choosing someone who fits the team culture a little better. Nobody says the quiet part out loud, but the outcome is consistent. Humor creeps in when you realize how often integration gets framed as a one-way street. Learn the norms, adapt, blend in. Meanwhile, the definition of belonging never quite stretches far enough to include you fully. You can do everything right and still be treated like a guest who stayed a little too long. Sweden's progressive branding isn't fake, it's just incomplete. Strong systems don't automatically dismantle bias, especially when discrimination shows up as hesitation instead of hostility. And because the barriers are soft, they're harder to challenge. There's no door slammed in your face, it simply never opens. None of this means Black people can't build lives here. They do every day. But the mental math is constant. Am I overthinking this? Was that exclusion intentional? Should I push back or let it go? Those questions add weight to routines that should be simple. Sweden's challenge isn't about cruelty. It's about comfort with ambiguity, a system that prefers to believe equality exists rather than interrogate where it falls short. The question isn't whether Sweden is progressive. It's whether progress is measured by intention or by who still feels outside the circle when the room is quiet. Number 3. Finland. Finland's image is almost mythic. Quiet competence, trust-based systems, world-class education, and a society that prides itself on fairness. It feels like the kind of place where discrimination wouldn't survive the paperwork. But for many Black residents, the experience can be far more draining than the brand suggests. The challenge here isn't chaos or danger, it's isolation wrapped in efficiency. EU-focused reporting and media coverage from outlets like Reuters and The Guardian have highlighted discrimination and harassment experienced by Black people in Finland. Sometimes it's public and jarring: verbal abuse on public transport, hostile encounters in nightlife districts, moments that break the illusion of Nordic calm. Other times it's structural and quieter, which somehow makes it worse. When discrimination doesn't shout, it lingers. Public harassment tends to spike when visibility is high. Being one of very few Black people in a space turns normal routines into performances. You're seen, noticed, remembered. Mistakes stick longer. Successes get framed as exceptions. The Guardian has documented how Black Finns and migrants describe this hypervisibility as exhausting, not because every interaction is negative, but because neutrality feels rare. You're never just another person in the room. Then there's employment and access to services, where the phrase cultural fit starts doing a lot of heavy lifting. Reports from the EU Fundamental Rights Agency show patterns where minorities face barriers that are hard to challenge legally but easy to feel personally. Resumes get praised, interviews go well, and then nothing. Feedback is vague. Decisions are final. The role went in another direction. That direction often looks remarkably familiar. What makes Finland especially tricky is how polite exclusion can be. No raised voices, no confrontation, just distance. Systems function smoothly, which means when something doesn't work for you, it feels like a personal failure instead of a structural one. That self-doubt is part of the pressure. Are you imagining it? Overreacting? Missing some unspoken rule everyone else learned? Humor becomes a survival tool here. People joke about being the diversity, the one black face in meetings, classrooms, or entire neighborhoods. It's funny, until it isn't. Because being the exception comes with responsibility. You represent more than yourself. You correct assumptions, you educate, you absorb awkwardness so others don't have to. Finland isn't hostile across the board, and many black people build meaningful lives here, but the cumulative effect matters. Life doesn't fall apart in dramatic moments. It wears you down through repetition, through being questioned just a little more, through opportunities that almost materialize, through social circles that never quite widen. You don't need a crowd yelling slurs for life to get exhausting. Sometimes all it takes is the quiet, constant reminder that you're tolerated, respected on paper, and still standing slightly outside the circle. Finland's challenge isn't cruelty. It's the cost of always being noticeable, in a place that values blending in. Number 2, Austria. Austria feels controlled in a way that's almost soothing at first. Clean streets, punctual systems, polite interactions, and an overall sense that rules matter here. But for many black residents, that same orderliness quickly reveals a different function: gatekeeping. When everything runs on procedure, exclusion doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be consistent. EU-level findings referenced by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR, show very high reported discrimination among people of African descent in Austria, especially in areas that determine whether life actually works: employment and housing. These aren't fringe inconveniences. They're the foundations of stability. And when access to them becomes conditional, daily life turns into a slow grind. The job market is where the pattern becomes painfully clear. Qualifications may be solid, experience may be relevant, interviews may even feel positive. Then progress stalls, promotions lag, opportunities evaporate. Black workers report being clustered into lower roles, monitored more closely, and passed over quietly when advancement is on the table. Nothing dramatic happens, just enough hesitation to keep you exactly where you are. Orderly systems are excellent at preserving hierarchy without ever announcing it. Housing searches tell a similar story. OHCHR data points to bias and gatekeeping that black applicants feel immediately. Emails go unanswered. Viewings get canceled. Apartments are suddenly no longer available. No explanation is required because none is demanded. The process is polite, professional, and closed. You're not rejected. You're simply never chosen. And when that happens over and over, the message sinks in. What makes Austria especially tricky is how easy it is for exclusion to hide behind normalcy. There's no spectacle, no confrontation, just rules applied with suspicious consistency. Landlords follow policy, employers cite fit, everyone stays calm. Meanwhile, black residents do extra labor, over-preparing, over-performing, and over-explaining, just to be considered baseline acceptable. Sarcasm creeps in when you realize how often integration is discussed without asking who sets the standard. You can speak the language, understand the norms, pay the taxes, and still feel like you're waiting for approval that never arrives. Belonging becomes a moving target. You're always almost there. Austria isn't hostile in the cinematic sense. It's efficient. And efficiency, when paired with bias, can be ruthless. Systems don't need prejudice to feel personal. They just need outcomes that repeat themselves. When black residents consistently hit invisible ceilings in work and invisible walls in housing, it stops being coincidence. The calm exterior remains intact. The streets stay quiet. The paperwork stays neat. But behind that order is a reality many black people recognize instantly. The door doesn't slam. it simply never opens. And the longer you stand there politely waiting, the clearer it becomes that silence can be just as powerful as refusal. Number 1. Germany. Strong laws, serious history, endless reminders that this time it's different. Germany presents itself as a country that learned from the past and built guardrails to make sure discrimination doesn't repeat itself. On paper, it's impressive. In real life, for many Black residents, those protections often feel theoretical because closed doors don't always violate the law, they just never open. EU surveys analyzed by the Fundamental Rights Agency, along with reporting from Reuters, consistently show high self-reported discrimination among people of African descent in Germany. And the friction shows up exactly where stability begins: housing, employment, and everyday public life. These aren't abstract debates. These are the systems that decide whether you settle in or keep searching indefinitely. Start with housing. Germany's rental market is famously competitive, which makes bias easy to disguise. According to findings referenced by the OHCHR, Black applicants often experience no response patterns, messages unanswered, viewings canceled, listings suddenly gone. You can submit flawless applications, offer stable income, even speak the language, and still feel like you're shouting into a void. Nobody rejects you outright. They just choose silence. And when silence repeats itself, it starts sounding intentional. Employment follows the same rhythm. Resumes with African or Afro-diasporic names receive fewer callbacks. Interviews feel promising, then stall. In workplaces, Black employees report closer monitoring, slower advancement, and a constant need to prove competence that others are granted by default. Again, nothing dramatic happens, just enough resistance to keep momentum slow and ceilings low. Public space adds another layer. Monitoring bodies like the Council of Europe have raised concerns around policing and treatment of minorities. Being in the wrong neighborhood, standing too long, or simply existing can trigger extra attention. You're not accused, you're observed. Not detained, just questioned. It's subtle, procedural, and exhausting. The feeling of being an outsider doesn't come from one incident, it comes from repetition. What makes Germany especially complicated is the contradiction. Anti-racism laws exist, institutions talk about inclusion, yet daily experience tells a different story. You're protected in theory, filtered in practice. The system isn't screaming hostility, it's whispering exclusion. Sarcasm creeps in when you realize how often Black people are told to be patient. Patient with housing, patient with careers, patient with acceptance. But patience doesn't pay rent. Patience doesn't build wealth. And patience doesn't erase the toll of constantly being evaluated. Germany doesn't lack rules. It lacks consistency between values and outcomes. And when outcomes repeat themselves across housing, jobs, and public life, the conclusion becomes hard to ignore. This is where the countdown ends, but the conversation shouldn't. If this series challenged your assumptions, share your experiences in the comments, subscribe to Virtual Travel by Brian, and keep watching. Because where you live shapes how you live. And not every door that looks open actually is.